The fire had long since died down, leaving only the faint glow of embers breathing beneath a blanket of ash. I sat there in silence, listening to the forest pressing from all sides, the trees standing like dark pillars, unmoving yet alive. The fog curled low across the ground, swallowing the edges of my vision. Even the stars above looked blurred, as though the night itself didn't want to be seen. The air was heavy, colder than it should have been, and every sound seemed sharpened against the quiet. The snap of a branch, the faint hum of the wind threading through pine needles, the soft rhythm of my own breath. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and tried to convince myself that the stillness was safe. But it wasn't. Stillness is never safe out here. I remember how the silence broke. Not with a scream, not with a growl, but with a low, wet whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My pulse froze, and every hair on my neck rose as though touched by unseen hands. That's when I realized the fog wasn't empty at all. Something was standing in it, something watching me. That was the night I learned you should never look too long into the mountains. The forest was quiet in a way that pressed against my ears. The air was damp, smelling of wet leaves and earth. Twilight was fading, and the fog curled around the trunks like slow fingers. I knelt, trying to coax the fire alive. The kindling shivered beneath my hands. A spark, then a sigh, and the flame died. I added more wood. Twigs snapped under my fingers. The smell of smoke lingered, faint and bitter. I turned away for a moment. When I looked back, nothing glowed. Nothing but gray ash and shadow. The wind whispered between the branches. It made the trees lean, as if curious. Every rustle felt deliberate, measured. I struck another match. The flame shivered, caught, then fell. It felt wrong, like the forest was waiting, watching, hungry. I tried again, and again. Each time, the fire burned just enough to tease me. Then it vanished. My hands were cold, my breath fog in the air. A hum ran low in my chest. The wood seemed deeper with each failure, darker, closer. I could almost hear soft footsteps. Not mine. Hours passed. I stacked her higher, every branch heavier than the last. And still, the fire refused me. I leaned back against a tree. The bark was rough under my fingers, wet with dew. A pause. The wind dropped. Even the fog stopped moving. A perfect, uneasy silence. I thought about leaving, but the shadows felt thicker the further I walked. So I stayed and struck another match. This time, the flame roared. It licked the logs greedily. Warmth spread, soft against my fingers. I watched it dance, hypnotized. Finally, a fire I could trust. Then I noticed them, pale faces just beyond the glow. Eyes reflecting the firelight, empty, still. They didn't move. They didn't blink. But they watched. I froze. The hum in the forest grew louder, like breath behind the trees. The fire flickered. Shadows stretched toward me, slow, patient. I wanted to call out, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I wanted to move, but my legs felt like roots in the soil. I blinked. They were closer, closer than they had been. But the fire, it burned too bright for them, I think, or maybe too small. And then they were gone, just a fire and me, the fog curling around my boots, the soft hum in the trees, the rustling that might have been wind or might have been something else. I sat there until the flames softened, until my hands remembered warmth, and I realized the forest hadn't let me leave. Not yet. The fire crackled. A log shifted. I shivered, and somewhere behind the shadows, I felt eyes still watching. The sun was low, filtering through the tall pines. The forest floor was soft with needles, damp and fragrant. Each step sank slightly, leaving a quiet imprint behind me. I paused, leaning against a rough trunk. The bark pressed into my palm, cool and textured. A breeze wove through the branches, carrying a faint hum. At first, I thought it was a wind. Then I heard it, a voice, soft, almost urgent, threading through the pine needles, whispering shapes I couldn't grasp. I tilted my head, straining. The smell of sap and earth thickened. The air felt alive, charged. The voice returned, closer this time, winding around my ears. It whispered my name, just a breath, a hint, but when I looked around, the trees were empty. Nothing moved but the fog curling at their bases. I pressed a hand to my chest. A pulse quickening. The pine needles quivered in the breeze, brushing against my boots. Another whisper. I couldn't tell if it was behind me or inside me. I tried to step forward, but the forest seemed to breathe with me. Every rustle matched my heartbeat. Every shadow lingered longer than it should. I crouched down. Fingers sank into the soft carpet of needles. A faint hum rose from the ground. The voices threaded through it, winding, twisting. My name again, so soft. It almost sounded like the wind, but the whisper carried a weight. A pull. I couldn't see anyone. Couldn't see anything but the gray trunks and pale light. I held my breath. The wind paused. The forest paused. Even the fog seemed to hesitate, hanging low and silent. Then a soft movement. Not footsteps, more like shadows brushing shadows. I blinked. The pine needles stilled. I rose slowly. Every step pressed into a quiet rhythm, heavy with the smell of wet earth. The whispers followed, echoed, faded. I leaned back against a tree, hands brushing cold bark. The hum receded. The forest exhaled. I stayed there, listening to nothing and everything. The needles underfoot, soft. The fog curling at the bases of the pines. And my name, somewhere between memory and wind, still lingering. The mountain path was steep, rough under my boots. Twilight had already touched the peaks, leaving a pale, cold light. The air smelled of frost and pine, sharp and quiet. I had heard the stories. Hikers vanishing. Boot prints ending at the cliff's edge. But the lantern called. At first, it was just a flicker in the distance, like a candle held by an unseen hand. I paused, breath misting the chill. The fog hugged the ridge, curling around rocks and roots. I stepped forward. The lantern moved too, swaying gently. Soft, pale light threading through the darkness. Each step brought the smell of damp stone and earth closer. I could feel the hush of the mountain, the hum of wind in the rocks. Soft footsteps behind me, or maybe within me. The lantern remained just ahead, patient. My heart beat slow, careful. The air was colder here, biting at my cheeks. I felt the rough stone under my fingertips as I steadied myself. The fog shifted, thickening, hiding what lay beyond. I reached a curve in the path. The lantern was closer now, its light trembling like breath. I thought I saw a figure just beyond it, a shadow flickering with the flame. I called out. My voice sounded strange, swallowed by the mountain. No reply, just the hum of wind and the soft rustle of pine. The path narrowed. Boot prints appeared in the dirt, old and fresh. They led toward the lantern. Every print ended suddenly. At the cliff's edge, I froze. The lantern flickered. A pale glow lingered over nothing. The wind carried whispers, long and thin. My name, maybe, or something like it. I stepped closer. The fog pressed around me. A taste of cold metal and earth in the air. I could feel the slope beneath my boots, sharp and unsteady. The lantern danced just out of reach. And then I saw it. Boot prints that weren't mine. Leading away from me. Leading toward the edge. They stopped. I wanted to turn back. The mountain seemed to shift beneath my weight. The air grew heavy, charged with a hush that pressed against my chest. The lantern flickered again, steady now, almost watching. I held my breath. The fog curled around my ankles. Every rustle, every whisper, every soft shift in the rocks felt alive. The lantern didn't move, and yet it led me forward. I reached the cliff. The light hovered over nothing. The drop was sheer, jagged, empty, and the whispers grew closer, nearer than the wind. A pull at my mind, gentle but insistent. I stepped back. The lantern remained, its glow soft, patient. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Something waited beyond, quiet, still. I left the ridge slowly. Boot prints behind me, but the path felt wrong. The mountain hummed beneath the fog, the pine needles brushing softly at my arms. The lantern flickered one last time. Then it vanished, and I realized I wasn't sure if I had followed it, or if it had let me go. The night was heavy still and cold. The tent walls pressed against my skin, damp with evening fog. Pine needles crunched softly under the weight of night air. I had slept, or thought I had. A faint scratching drew me awake. Beneath the floor, rhythmic and hesitant, like nails on soft earth. I pressed my ear against the canvas in the ground. The voice came then, low and uneven, almost buried. It muttered words I hadn't spoken aloud, words I hadn't told anyone. The smell of damp soil rose through the tent. My breath fogged in the thin space between canvas and earth. The scratching continued, slow, deliberate, a hum of movement under my palms. I could feel the vibration through the floor, soft, insistent, like a heartbeat beneath the soil. The words repeated, curling around my ears. Familiar, intimate, impossible. I leaned back, staring at the tent ceiling. The fabric moved slightly with the night wind, shadowing the shapes of trees above. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to move. My body refused. The voice continued, steady, patient. Its timbre was low, rasping, yet impossible to locate. The air smelled of wet pine and the earth's cold breath. Each rustle outside pressed against the thin walls. The voice spoke again, muttering my secrets, the things no one else knew. I tried to reason, to tell myself it was imagination, but the hum beneath me matched my pulse. Every scratch a reminder that I wasn't alone. I traced my fingers over the tent floor. Rough, damp canvas under my fingertips. Nothing moved above it. Nothing moved inside it. The whispers grew softer, slower, like they were sinking deeper into the soil. The night around me stayed still, yet every sound felt magnified. I held my breath. The voice paused, leaving a vacuum in the dark. Only the hum of night, the faint rustle of trees, and my heartbeat in my ears. I lifted my hand from the tent floor. The cold lingered in my fingertips. A shadow shifted outside, brushing against the fabric. A faint exhale, a tremor in the air. And then silence. The scratching stopped. The voice retreated. Only the smell of wet earth remained. I lay still until dawn, listening to the wind and the fog curling through pines. The voice did not return, but I knew it was still there, beneath the tent. Beneath me, the forest had been alive. Wind weaving through the branches, pine needles brushing my cheeks. Insects droned softly. Birds called far above. Then it stopped, all at once. Every sound vanished, leaving only emptiness. The air felt heavier, thick with stillness. I held my breath. The fog curled around my boots, damp and cold. Shadows stretched long between the trees. A hum of absence pressed against my ears. My pulse was loud, echoing in the hollow quiet. I shifted, listening for anything at all. But the forest had no reply. Then I heard it, soft, measured, footsteps, circling me, slow, perfectly in rhythm with my breathing. I could feel them in the soil beneath my boots. Each step stirred the earth. A subtle vibration, barely a whisper, yet undeniable. I froze. The fog pressed closer, smelling of wet pine and moss. My hands trembled slightly, brushing rough bark for reassurance. The footsteps moved, always matching me, always just out of sight. I tried to follow their rhythm. My own steps faltered against the wet earth. Every glance between the trunks revealed nothing but gray shadows. Yet I felt them circling. A branch snapped somewhere distant, or maybe too close. I couldn't tell. The forest held its breath. So did I. The fog thickened, curling at my knees, clinging to my clothes. The air felt wet, tasting faintly of decay and cold stone. The footsteps remained, steady, inevitable. Closer now, then further. An impossible dance. I pressed my back to a tree, its bark rough under my palm, grounding me. But the rhythm persisted, like something alive, waiting, watching. The silence between each step stretched longer. The air vibrated with it. Every rustle outside was magnified. Every shadow seemed to twitch. I dared not move. My breath came in shallow bursts, matching the invisible footsteps. The forest was hollow, yet full of presence. An unseen gaze, patient, cold. And then they stopped. All at once, the hollow quiet returned. The fog curled lower. My pulse slowed. I stayed pressed to the tree, ears straining, hands trembling against rough bark. The forest remained still. The footsteps were gone. Yet I knew they had not left. Only waiting, only breathing beneath the fog. The trailhead was quiet, damp earth under my boots. The smell of pine and early morning fog lingering in the air. A bird called far above, though it sounded distant, hollow. He was there, a man standing at the edge of the path, eyes impossibly wide, smiling without blinking. I froze. The air pressed against my skin, thick and cold. His smile didn't shift. It remained steady, patient, unmoving. I stepped closer. The crunch of needles underfoot was loud in the quiet. The wind stirred faintly, brushing against my jacket. He remained pale in the soft light, as if waiting. I wanted to look away. The unease settled like a stone in my chest. Something about him didn't belong here, or anywhere. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost its shape beneath the trees. I hiked deeper into the woods, leaves brushing against my arms, damp with fog. Then I saw him again. Same clothes, same impossibly wide eyes, same unblinking smile. I stopped. The earth felt heavier beneath my feet. The fog seemed to cling closer. How had he arrived before me? There was no way. I tried to convince myself it was someone else, a stranger following the trail, but every detail was the same. Even the faint hum of his presence matched the first encounter. I turned, hoping to find a path around him. The shadows shifted with the breeze. The smell of wet pine and soil pressed to my nose. But he remained patient, waiting impossibly still. I took another step. The forest held its breath. Leaves whispered softly, brushing against my hands. The wind carried no other noise. I blinked. He was closer than I remembered. The smile didn't falter. His eyes, they held something patient, something endless. I moved again, slow, careful, each footstep pressing into soft earth. He mirrored me, though I hadn't looked back. The rhythm between us was quiet, subtle, impossible to ignore. I wanted to speak, to ask a question, but my voice was swallowed by the fog, by the hush of the woods, by the impossibility of what I was seeing. And then, just like that, he was gone. The space where he had stood stretched empty. The forest exhaled. Leaves rustled faintly in the breeze. I stopped, breath shallow, hands brushing against rough bark for grounding. The smile lingered in my mind, wide, unblinking, patient. I left the trailhead slowly, each step measured, the fog curling at my boots. And though I never saw him again, I knew the forest had carried him, or that it had always been waiting just beyond the path, just beyond the edge of light. Snow pressed against the windows, thick and muffling. The air smelled sharp with cold and pine. The cabin was quiet, isolated, every creak was loud in the stillness. I tried to sleep. Blankets pulled tight around me. Outside, the world was white and still. Then it began, a slow scratching along the wooden walls. Circling, deliberate, not sudden, not frantic. Patient, I held my breath. The smell of wood and frost filled my nose. The scratching traced patterns, almost deliberate, almost thoughtful. I leaned closer to the wall, fingers grazing rough timber. The sound paused, then continued, always circling, just beneath my ear, just out of reach. The snow outside remained untouched. Not a footprint, not a shift. Nothing moved except the rhythm of the scratching. I pressed my face to the wall. Cold seeped through the wood, sharp against my cheek. The hum of the wind outside, soft and distant, was swallowed by the cabin's stillness. And the scratching continued. I wanted to see, to look through the window, but the snow was unbroken. The forest lay beneath white silence. Empty. I stepped back, heart slow and loud in my chest. The scratching circled again, tracing the same path. I could almost feel it under my skin, pressing, waiting, patient. I leaned against the door. It was rough, warm from the stove earlier, yet cold now in the chill that crept between floorboards. Every scrape of nail or claw, whatever it was, seemed to echo through the room. I watched the walls, the frost-forming patterns on the windows, the pale light of early dawn filtering through the snow, and still the scratching. It moved with intention, a rhythm matching my pulse, sometimes slower, sometimes faster, always circling, always patient. I held my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but the vibration passed through the wood, through the floor, through me. I opened a window slightly. The cold bit my fingers. The snow outside untouched, silent. No prints, no tracks, nothing that could have made the sound. I sank to the floor, the wood beneath me cold and solid. The scratching continued above, beside, behind. Not random, not chaotic, waiting. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The cabin was quiet. The snow was still untouched. The air smelled of frost and pine. I stayed on the floor until the pale light filled the room, until every shadow had softened. The scratching did not return, but I could feel in the walls. Still there, patient, just beyond reach, circling, waiting. The clearing was quiet, swallowed by fog. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin. Each step sank softly into moss and damp leaves. I thought I saw movement ahead, a shadow shifting in the gray haze. The fog clung to my clothes, cold and damp. Then I saw it, a deer frozen, antlers twisted, unnatural. Its eyes glinted dimly through the fog, watching, unblinking. I froze. The wind whispered through the pines. Needles brushed against my face, cold and sharp. The deer remained still, impossible in its posture. I stepped closer. My breath came shallow, mist curling around my mouth. The forest felt heavier, waiting. And then it straightened, its back lifted. Tall, upright, like a man. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The cold seeped into my bones. Branches snapped under my boots. The fog wrapped tighter around the clearing. Its head tilted slightly, antlers curling at impossible angles. Eyes fixed on me, patient and empty. A hum rose faintly, vibrating through the ground. The moss beneath my feet felt alive, pressing upward. I wanted to turn, but my legs refused. Each breath trembled in my chest. The forest seemed to lean closer, curious. It moved slowly, deliberate. Soft steps on soft moss. No rustle of leaves, no crack of twig, only the shift of shadow and fog. I watched as it paused, head tilting, observing, antlers framing its strange, upright form. The air tasted of damp wood and something darker. Time fractured. Minutes stretched, endless. The clearing felt smaller, tighter, trapped within the fog and the unnatural shape before me. Then it lowered itself, back to all fours. Antlers still twisted, still wrong. And just like that, it disappeared into the gray. I stood alone. The fog curled around my boots. Needles brushed my hands. Breath quiet, shallow. The clearing returned to stillness. But the weight of what I had seen pressed against me. The memory lingered, upright, watching, waiting. The mountain was quiet, fog curling between the trees. The air smelled of wet pine and cold stone. My boots sank softly into the mossy earth with each step. I saw it there. A cabin, small, hunched beneath the gray sky. Windows framed in pale wood, but no door. I paused, hand brushing against rough bark, heart pressing tight against my chest. I circled slowly, peering in through the glass. Figures moved inside. Shadows that bent and twisted unnaturally. Gestures faint, deliberate, almost human. The fog pressed closer. I could feel it on my face, cold and damp. A hum ran low in the forest, like the cabin itself was breathing. I stepped back, boots brushing moss and needles. The wind shifted. The forest seemed to lean in listening. The figures inside, they didn't notice me. Or maybe they were waiting. I circled to the other side, expecting to find a door. But there was none, just walls, smooth and unbroken, as though the cabin had swallowed its own entrance. I leaned closer to the glass. Figures paused, frozen mid-motion. A shadow stretched along the floor, then vanished. The smell of damp wood and cold earth thickened in my nose. I stepped back again, confused. The fog swirled between the trees, masking the cabin. When I circled to where I had first seen the windows, they were gone. Nothing remained but pale, empty walls. No glass, no figures, no cabin as I remembered it. The air was still, no wind, no birds, just the pressure of silence pressing against my ears and the memory of the shapes inside. I pressed a hand to my chest, breath fogging the cold. The moss beneath my boots felt softer, almost too soft. The shadows of the trees leaned closer, waiting. I stepped back slowly, leaving the place behind. But the memory lingered. Windows without doors, figures without bodies, and the hum of the forest that seemed to follow me as I walked away. The trail was quiet, swallowed by fog. Pine needles brushed my boots, damp and soft. The air smelled of wet earth and cold resin. I spoke softly, testing the stillness. My words floated, then returned, slightly altered, like someone else was repeating after me. I froze. The wind stirred the branches, rustling faintly against the fog. Each echo felt deliberate, patient. I whispered my name. It came back, stretched, thinner, almost wrong. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. The smell of moss and cold stone thickened in my nose. I spoke again, a simple question. The echo answered, not my voice, but shadow of it shifting, teasing. Every word became unfamiliar. Even though it had come from my own mouth, I stopped speaking, hoped the echoes would fade. But they didn't. They continued, soft and deliberate, a voice repeating what I hadn't said. The fog pressed against my face. Breath hung in front of me, pale and trembling. The needles underfoot seemed sharper, more alive. Every rustle, every sigh of wind magnified the silence. I moved slowly, boots sinking into damp moss. The echoes followed, patient, impossible to locate. Every shadow stretched longer. Every step pressed into the earth left me uneasy. I tried to call out again, reasoning with myself. The echo returned, but wrong. Shapes of words bending, turning, like the forest had learned to mimic me. I pressed a hand to the tree, rough bark grounding me. The cold of the trunk seeped into my palm. The echoes continued, never stopping. A soft, patient hum under the fog. I stopped, every sense straining. The smell of damp pine, the cold mist curling around my boots. The echoes, repeating even when I went silent. Time stretched. I could feel it pressing in. The forest was alive with a quiet intelligence. Waiting, mirroring. I turned, trying to leave. Fog clung to my jacket, brushing against my arms. Every step pressed into the soft earth, but the echo followed. Even without my voice, the forest spoke in my words. I finally stopped completely. Breath shallow, body tense. The echoes lingered, patient, alive, and I realized I was alone but not alone. The trail stretched ahead, damp and soft beneath my boots. Pine needles pressed into the earth, heavy with fog and moisture. The air smelled of wet bark and cold stone. I hiked, step after step, each breath fogging in front of me, sharp and cold. The fallen log appeared again. I blinked uncertain. I had passed it before. Or had I? I pushed forward. The forest folded around me, trees leaning closer, branches brushing my arms. Mist curled along the trail, hiding familiar markers. And there it was, the log, fallen, moss-covered, unchanged. The same. Every path seemed to fold back onto itself. My water bottle was low. Cold on my tongue, a thin trickle. The forest pressed in, quiet, endless. I moved again. Leaves rustled underfoot. The fog thickened, brushing my cheeks. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, following, folding. I tried to mark the trail. A broken branch, a scuff in the dirt. It didn't matter. The log returned. Each step I took looping me back. I leaned against a tree, rough bark biting my fingers. The forest smelled damp, alive, patient. Every rustle was magnified, every breath sharp in my ears. I ran a few steps, hoping to break the pattern. The earth beneath me hummed, Steady, persistent. The fog curled, masking the trail ahead. And then the log appeared. Exhaustion pressed into my chest. My boots heavy with mud. The forest held its breath. Patient, waiting. I sank to the log, hands brushing the cold, mossy surface. The fog wrapped around me, silent and unmoving. The forest had no end. It looped endlessly, folding in on itself. And I realized I was alone, but trapped in its quiet rhythm. Dawn crept slowly over the mountains. The fog thickened, curling between the trees, wet and cold against my cheeks. I could see only a few feet ahead. Branches loomed like shadows, needles brushing my jacket with damp insistence. The forest smelled of wet earth and frost. Each step pressed into moss, soft and cold. My breath rose in pale clouds. I raised my camera, hesitant. The flash lit the fog, brief and stark against the gray. Dozens of eyes reflected back, pale, unblinking, patient. They hovered in the fog, floating just beyond reach, just beyond reason. I froze. The air felt heavier, thick with presence. The hum of the wind seemed swallowed, leaving only the pressure of watching. I stepped back. Twigs snapped softly underfoot. The eyes shifted, following, though I could see no shapes, no bodies. Fog pressed closer, curling around my boots, clinging to my hair. The cold pressed into my skin, sharp, biting. Each exhale trembled in my chest. I blinked. The eyes didn't leave. Even as I lowered the camera, their pale reflections remained. I tried to move. The fog seemed alive, folding around me. Every step echoed in stillness. Every shadow stretched toward me. I whispered, barely audible, hoping for sound to anchor me. The echo returned, empty, a breath of itself in the thick gray. I could feel them in the forest, watching, waiting, patient, silent. The flash had shown them, but the fog had hidden everything else. The forest pressing closer, and I realized I was not alone. I stepped slowly backward. Branches scraped against my arms, cold and rough. The eyes followed, pale and unblinking. The mist curled and shifted, masking everything but their gaze. Then, after what felt like forever, the sun rose higher. The fog thinned slightly. The eyes faded into gray, leaving only memory and unease. I stayed where I was, hands pressed the rough bark, breath shallow, listening to the forest exhale. The clearing was empty. The air smelled faintly of frost and pine, but I could still feel them, patient, waiting just beyond the veil of fog. The night pressed cold against my skin. Frost clung to the edges of my jacket. Each exhale hung white in the air, drifting slowly, dissolving into darkness. I shivered, wrapping my arms tighter. The forest was quiet. Branches whispered faintly in the wind, needles brushing against one another like hushed voices. Then I saw it, another puff of breath, just inches from my face. I froze. The air between us trembled with it, cold and impossibly close. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. The smell of pine and frost filled my nose. The cold seemed sharper, biting deeper, pressing into my bones. I leaned back slightly. The breath remained patient, hovering, matching my rhythm, mirroring me. The fog curled at my boots. Shadows stretched along the ground. Every rustle of the branches sounded louder, every distant snap sharper. I reached out with a trembling hand. Fingers brushed empty air. Nothing, yet the breath lingered, inches from mine. I turned slowly, trying to see. The darkness held its shape unbroken, but the frost of the second breath remained ghostly, hovering. I stepped back, boots pressing into the frozen earth. Every step echoed softly. The wind shifted, stirring the fog around me. The breath mirrored each movement, patient, deliberate. I swallowed hard, the taste of cold in my mouth. The silence stretched long, filled with only the shared rhythm of two breaths. I blinked. It did not disappear. The forest held it there, just beyond reason, just beyond sight. I finally sank to ground. Rough moss beneath my fingers, cold pressing into my legs. The breath lingered, watching, quiet and impossible. The night seemed to fold around me. Every shadow stretched longer. Every exhale trembled in the frozen air. I stayed still until the fog thinned slightly. The forest exhaled. The second breath had vanished, but I could still feel it, patient, waiting just beyond my own. The campground stretched ahead, pale in the morning light. Cars lined every spot. Tents pitched as if in a hurry. Smoke drifted from small, dying fires. I stepped over scattered gear. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a picnic table. The scent of chard would mix with damp pine, but no one was there. I walked slowly, boots pressing into soft earth. Every step echoed strangely in the quiet. A breeze rustled through the trees, and I thought I heard the forest breathe. Tents swayed gently. No movement inside. Car doors sat open, key still in ignition. Something wrong lingered in the air. I leaned closer to a fire pit, ashes still warm beneath my fingers. A small hum vibrated through ground. The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting. I moved between rows of cars. Paint glinted in the soft light. Footprints appeared fresh, then vanished as though the earth had swallowed them. I stopped. The forest exhaled, slow and deliberate. The smell of damp would press against my nose. Branches leaned closer, brushing softly, shadowing the empty scene. I circled the campground again. Everything was the same. Abandoned plates, a mug half filled with cold coffee, but not a single soul. I heard it again. The faint, steady breathing of the trees. A rhythm matched my own, but heavier, older, patient. I sank to the ground near a tent. Hands brushed cold earth and wet moss. The quiet pressed against my chest, every nerve alert, every shadow alive with absence. I stayed there, watching. The fires smoldered. The fog curled at the edges of the forest. The cars sat empty, the tent still, but the forest breathed. And I knew I was not alone, just not in a way I could see. The river curved through the forest, silver and cold in the pale morning light. Mist rose from its surface, curling around moss-covered rocks. The air smelled of wet stone and pine. I knelt at the bank, cold bite of my fingers. Water lapped gently at the edge, soft against the smooth stones beneath my hands. I bent to refill my bottle, and froze. The water had stopped, perfectly still, frozen mid-flow, like a photograph caught in time. My reflection stared back, eyes wide, and then blinked. I jerked back. Mist curled around my boots, damp and clinging. The forest held its breath. I reached again, fingers hovering above the surface. Ripples didn't come. The air hummed faintly, like the pulse of something unseen beneath the water. The river's murmur returned slowly. Current rippled, water flowed, but my reflection lingered, watching longer than it should. I pressed my palm to the cold river stone. Shivers ran up my arm. The smell of wet earth pressed in, thick and heavy. I knelt, still, listening to the gentle hum of flowing water. The forest seemed alive around me. Every twig, every leaf, brushed softly against the fog. I looked back at the river. The reflection had returned to normal, but the memory of its blink lingered. A quiet pulse, a moment where the world had paused. I drank slowly from my bottle, the water tasting colder than the air. The river whispered in its gentle motion. Branches leaned close, needles brushing my arms. The forest exhaled. I stepped away, boots pressing into the soft, damp earth. The river moved again, but the memory of stillness clung, shivering beneath the surface of my skin. The fog curled around the trees. Shadows stretched along the bank. I could feel the pulse of the water, slow, deliberate, patient. And I realized even the river could watch. Even stillness could hide a presence. The forest breathed. The river flowed. And I walked on alone but not untouched. The forest lay quiet beneath a pale morning light. Mist curled along the trail, soft and thick. The air smelled of damp pine and cold earth. I lifted my camera, pressing it to my eye. Breath visible, shallow, trembling slightly. The world felt still, each step muted beneath the fog. I adjusted the lens. A fallen branch crunched softly under my boot. The mist drifted around me, shifting and curling like it had its own weight. I snapped a photo. The click echoed in the empty forest. I lowered the camera. and froze. Behind me, in the frame, stood a group of hikers, eyes forward, motionless. I had been alone. My chest tightened. The forest seemed to press closer. Branches brushed my arms, damp and rough. The smell of cold earth filled my lungs. I turned slowly. Empty trail. No one. Just fog curling between the trees, silent and patient. I raised the camera again. The viewfinder showed only mist and shadow. Yet the photo remained in memory, a frozen moment of impossible presence. I stepped back. Twigs snapped beneath boots. The fog thickened, hugging the trunks of the trees. Every shadow stretched longer. I crouched, hands pressed to cold moss, breath fogging in front of me. The forest exhaled slowly. The weight of eyes lingered, unseen. I lowered the camera finally. The trail remained empty, but the photograph whispered in memory, a proof I could not deny. I walked on, slow, careful, fog curling around my shoulders. Every rustle, every hum of wind, reminded me of what I could not see. The forest swallowed the sound of my boots. Shadows reached into the mist. I realized I had never truly been alone. The woods were heavy with fog. Pine needles pressed damp against my boots. The morning air smelled of moss and cold stone. I paused on the trail. A voice drifted through the trees, soft, almost hesitant, calling my name. It was her, my mother, but she had been gone for years. My chest tightened. The damp air clung to my skin. Branches brushed lightly across my arms. I could feel the emptiness of the forest pressing in. I stepped forward, unsure. Each footfall sank into the soft earth. The voice called again, closer now, breath near enough to warm my cheek. I spun. Nothing. Mist curled around the trunks of the trees, shadowing empty space. The air hummed faintly. Every rustle of leaves sounded louder, sharper. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The voice whispered again, soft and insistent, closer than possible. I froze, hands brushing cold moss. Fog hugged my shoulders. I wanted to reach, to call back, but my voice stuck in my throat. It moved with me, the sound. Every step I took, the voice followed, always just behind. I looked around, desperate. Branches swayed, twisting shadows across the ground. The fog shifted with a weight I could feel, pressing the sound nearer. I sank to the forest floor. Fingers pressed to cold dirt and wet needles. The hum of the unseen presence vibrated through the ground. The voice called again, closer to my own breath. I closed my eyes. The forest exhaled. The mist curled tighter, embracing me, and the voice lingered patient, impossible. I could feel her there, not entirely her. The warmth of memory twisted with cold dread, and I realized I was not alone. The mountain loomed under a pale, cold moon. Wind rustled the dry needles beneath my boots. The air smelled of frost and stone. For 3 nights I had seen it, a dark figure, still unmoving, perched at the peak, shadowed against the sky. Watching, I approached slowly, each step careful, deliberate. Breath puffed in short white clouds. Mist clung to my clothes and hair, damp and cold. The trail narrowed. Rocks pressed sharp beneath my hands. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I reached the top. The silhouette was gone. Empty air, pale moonlight spilling over stone. Relief rose briefly. Then I looked down. Fresh footprints circled the spot where I had slept. They were too perfect, too deliberate. The ground smelled of damp earth and frost. The air hummed faintly, a low vibration beneath my feet. A shadow shifted at the edge of vision. I stepped forward, but the prints had no origin. No disturbance of trees or brush led here. It was as if they had appeared, waiting for me to notice. I crouched, fingertips brushing cold soil. The wind carried a distant hum, threading through the rocks and needles. I felt the presence before I saw it. Eyes, or something like them, tracing me from the emptiness around the peak. The forest seemed to tighten. Branches swayed without wind. Mist rolled across the stones, curling like smoke. I stood slowly, careful not to breathe too loud. The prints were still there, circle upon circle, impossibly precise. I turned. expecting the figure to emerge. Nothing moved, yet the sense of being watched pressed in. Heavy, inevitable. The peak felt infinite. The skies stretching endlessly above. The footprints whispered a warning in their silence, and I realized the figure had never left. I descended slowly, hands trailing along frost-covered rocks. Wind bit my cheeks. Mist followed, curling at my heels. The mountain held its shadow. The prints lingered in my mind, a quiet inevitability, and I walked on alone but never unobserved. The forest was quiet beneath the frost. Pine needles pressed cold against my palms. Air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. Night fell like a shroud. Every evening, a hollow knock echoed through the trees. Would striking would, slow, deliberate, patient. I lay in my tent, listening. The canvas pressed close to my skin, warm against the chill, but the sound reached me through it all. Each knock seemed to stretch time. The wind whispered between the trunks. Branches scraped lightly, but the knocking was separate, insistent, impossible to ignore. I traced my fingers over the thin floor of the tent. The smell of damp canvas mixed with my own sweat. I thought it was the trees, a branch falling, something caught in the frost. Night after night, the knocking followed me, always from outside, always precise, always patient. Tonight, I could feel it before I heard it. A pressure in the air, a vibration through the tent floor, like the forest itself was waiting. Then it came, closer, not from outside. Inside, I froze, canvas brushing my arms. My breath shallow, visible in the cold air. The hollow knock, soft, deliberate, right beside me. I couldn't move. Fingers pressed to the sleeping bag, heart hammering like the knock itself. The air smelled faintly of pine, but something else lingered, something metallic, sharp. The knock came again, echoing my own heartbeat. I imagined shadows stretching across the tent walls, but I couldn't tell what was real. All I could feel was a presence, patient, waiting, inside the same air I breathed. I wanted to call out, but no sound would come. Only the knock, circling in time with my pulse. Every tap drilled into the silence, thick and suffocating. I shut my eyes, trying to will it away. Canvas pressed in my face. The faint hum of the night was gone. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. And then it stopped. Not a sound, not a rustle, not even wind. Only the weight of being watched. The hollow knock lingered in memory, inside my chest, inside the still air. I lay there until dawn, fingers gripping cold fabric, heart refusing to slow. Outside, the forest waited, but the memory of the knock remained inside, patient, inevitable, like it had always been part of me. The tent smelled of damp canvas and pine. Outside, fog clung to the trees. Branches shivered in the faint wind. I spread the map on my knees. Paper soft under my fingers. The ink looked ordinary at first. Trails I knew, streams, ridges. But then the lines moved. Not slowly, not like wind smearing ink. They grew, twisting, darkening, drawing new trails I hadn't marked. Trails that led to places I didn't know. I leaned closer. The smell of wet earth drifted through the tent. A hum of static seemed to rise from the map itself. Each line pulsed slightly, alive, deliberate. Curiosity drew me. I followed the first new trail, in the early light. Fallen leaves pressed damp against my boots. The air smelled faintly of smoke and cold water. Every step was soft, careful, cautious. The forest shifted around me. Paths folded in ways I hadn't seen on any map. A tree leaned where it should not. A rock jutted unnaturally, almost like it had been placed. I felt watched. Soft, unseen footsteps whispered against the underbrush. The new trails kept leading me deeper. A small stream gurgled in pale light, though it wasn't marked on the map. I knelt to touch the water, ice cold, almost biting. The map in my pack seemed heavier, pulsing with dark ink, pulling me forward. I tried to mark my own route. The pen scratched across the paper. But the lines curved back, undoing my marks as if the map rejected me. A shadow flickered across the trees. Nothing moved, yet I could feel it, circling, patient. Branches brushed my face, wet with fog. The air smelled of moss and decay. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Every footstep echoed, swallowed by silence. I followed another trail. It ended in a clearing that didn't exist on any map I'd studied. Mist curled low, pale and thick. A stone circle lay in the center, edges worn smooth, darkened with age. The map in my hand shivered, the ink curling toward the clearing. I knelt again. Fingers traced the new trails. Cold seeped into my skin. The forest felt alive. Waiting, watching. I tried to fold the map, hide it, ignore it. But the ink pulsed again. Lines racing, branching, calling me onward. Each path a whisper. Each trail a pull I could not resist. I realized then, this map did not show what was. It showed what would be. Places that were never meant to be found. Paths that existed only to draw me further, deeper, alone. I looked up at the mist. No wind stirred the trees, but shadows moved in the fog, circling just out of sight. My breath felt loud, too loud, in the hush of the unseen watchers. I folded the map, tried to step back, but my feet carried me forward anyway. The forest opened before me, trails bending, twisting like ink on paper, leading to places that could not exist. The map lay warm in my pack, lines dark, pulsing, patient. I felt a pull in my chest, a quiet insistence that I follow. I did not look back. The forest held its breath. Fog curled low across the ground, soft and damp. The smell of pine mingled with wet earth. I stumbled across them without warning. Campers, asleep in a perfect circle. Tents closed, packed at their feet. Not a sound moved between them. Their breathing was strange, slow, measured, exactly in sync. One rise, one fall, all of them. I knelt on the mossy floor. The ground was cold, sticky with dew. My own breath sounded loud, uneven. Each exhale seemed to echo too long. Hours passed. The fog thickened around me. Bird song was absent. Even the wind hesitated. The campers remained unchanged, motionless. One of them, I noticed last, eyes open, pale, unblinking, staring at the sky, or maybe at me. I couldn't tell. I shifted my weight. Branches scraped overhead. The smell of smoke, faint, lingered. Old fire, half buried in the ground. I listened for a sigh, a rustle, nothing. Their skin glimmered slightly in the dim light. Moisture from the fog clung to their hair. The synchronized rhythm of their breathing hummed in the silence. It felt alive, waiting. I took a step back. Soft footfalls pressed against wet leaves. The eyes followed, unblinking. I crouched lower, closer to the circle. Curiosity warred with fear. The air grew colder, static pressing against my skin. Every sound of the forest felt slowed, stretched. Time seemed to bend around them. I thought about leaving, about running, but my feet stayed, drawn, held. The camper's chest rose again, in unison, precise, hypnotic, a rhythm I couldn't match. I knelt on the moss, letting the damp seep through my clothes. Their quiet, it pressed against my ears, soft but heavy. Even the hum of life around me seemed distant, swallowed. One last glance. The camper with open eyes. It felt deliberate, targeted, watching, knowing. I finally moved. Slow, careful, inch by inch. The circle remained unbroken. The rhythm remained unbroken. The silence absolute. I turned. Mist swirled at my shoulders. Branches scraped softly above. Nothing else moved. The image stayed with me. That circle. The synchronized breathing. The open eyes. I did not look back again. The fog lay heavy between the trees. Branches dripped with wet needles. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. I had been walking for hours, alone, every step pressing into the soft, muffled ground. Then I saw it, or me, a figure merged. Same height, same shape, same features. Even the same pale light reflecting off their eyes. For a moment, I thought my mind was folding, a trick of the fog, maybe a shadow pressed against memory. But it smiled, slow, knowing, and whispered, finally. The words, they chilled me. They sounded like my own voice, stretched thin, warped, Each syllable hummed in the damp air. I stepped closer, heart hammering, breath quick. The mist wrapped around my arms, clinging, cold. I could feel it pressing against my skin. The figure mirrored me. Every move, every hesitant step. It was perfect, too perfect. I wanted to speak, but my mouth dried. The forest seemed to lean in. Every rustle amplified. Every distant crack would echoed in my chest. Finally, it repeated, and this time it wasn't just words. It was a promise, or a claim. I looked past it. The trees twisted strangely, the fog folding in ways it shouldn't. Static filled the edges of my vision. I realized the forest wasn't normal anymore. It had been waiting. I raised my hand. It raised its own, exactly the same. The tips of our fingers almost touched, but the space between us felt like a chasm. My reflection, my twin, tilted its head. There was a softness there, a familiarity, but underneath a knowing hunger. Something ancient, patient, and cruel. The wind stilled. The world shrank to the hush of our shared breathing. Cold pressed into my bones. I could smell it, the damp, the earth, the faint decay, and beneath it, something else, something metallic, thick. I tried to step back, feet rooted to the ground. Every heartbeat thundered in my ears. The figure smiled wider, and it felt like the shadows were swallowing me. The fog swirled between us, whispering. I wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but it knew me, every thought, every fear, every step I had taken to get here. Then the figure tilted closer, eyes gleaming. The words repeated one last time, softer this time, almost tender. Finally, and I realized I had always been here, waiting for this. I backed away slowly, the cold mist wrapping around me like hands. Every breath rattled in my chest. The forest seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. When I finally dared to look back, it was gone, but the feeling lingered. The reflection of myself, unclaimed yet present, a shadow that knew my every thought, a mirror that waited for me to step closer. The fog closing again, and I walked on, alone, yet never truly alone. The forest was quiet. Morning fog draped itself over the moss, soft and damp. Every step sank slightly into the wet earth. I noticed them first. Feathers, pale, almost white, scattered across the ground, each one delicate, floating lightly over roots and stones. They formed a line, a path, leading deeper, where the trees grew taller and darker. I followed, feet brushing against ferns, the smell of damp pine filling my lungs. The mist whispered around me, pressing close. Every rustle of leaves echoed in the stillness. The feathers continued, miles of them, stretching endlessly ahead. Some lay in clusters, some drifted alone, as if placed carefully. I bent down, touched one, soft, almost alive under my fingers. The air changed, heavier, cooler, carrying the faint metallic tang of something I couldn't name. I shivered, but my steps didn't stop. Shadows shifted between the trees. I thought I glimpsed movement, pale shapes sliding behind trunks. But whenever I blinked, there was nothing. Birdsong had vanished. The hum of insects was gone. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. I reached the clearing. The feathers ended here, and so did the forest voice. It was silent, not the soft silence of snow or fog. This was the absence of sound itself, waiting, a stillness that pressed against my chest. I stepped forward slowly. The ground was soft with moss, and frost glimmered faintly in the pale light. Every movement sounded impossibly loud. Each breath, a small intruder in the emptiness. I looked around. No birds, no animals, no movement, except my own shadow stretching thin across the clearing. The fog curled at the edges, pale and motionless. I felt watched, not by eyes I could see, but by something aware, patient, something that had lined the path for me. I knelt to touch a feather at the clearing's edge. It seemed heavier than the others, cold, almost slick, like it had absorbed the silence around it. The forest waited. The air held a soft static, the kind that hums faintly in your skull. I swallowed. My heartbeat was loud. I stepped back. A single gust of wind stirred the fog, carrying the faint scent of feathers, dry and faintly sweet. The path behind me looked endless. But I didn't move. I stayed in the clearing. Alone but not alone. The silence pressed around me like a living thing. And the feathers, they seemed to watch, waiting, patient. Slowly I turned away. Every step or trace felt heavier, weighted with the quiet. The forest swallowed my footprints, leaving no trace. When I looked back, the clearing was empty. No feathers, no path, only the fog, still and unreadable. And I realized the trail had led me here, not to a place, but to the silence itself. Waiting for me, the ridge was quiet. Fog curled between the trees, pale and thick, draping over the moss like a blanket. The air smelled cold, damp, and faintly of smoke that wasn't mine. Midnight came slowly. The forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, brushing lightly against the branches. Then I saw it, a flicker of yellow light. One cabin, abandoned for years, glowing warm against the dark. I froze. The light pulsed, soft, steady, almost beckoning. A hum lingered in the air. Not music, not voices, just something vibrating under my skin. Another cabin, and another, all along the ridge. The lights ignited, as though someone had walked past them with a match. I moved closer. Branches brushed my face. The cold bit at my fingers. The fog swirled around my boots. Inside the nearest cabin, figures sat, motionless, all facing the window, their backs straight, hands folded. They didn't turn. They didn't breathe in any way I could see. I stepped closer. The wooden floor beneath my feet creaked softly. The scent of wood smoke and something faintly metallic filled the air. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I blinked. For a moment, I thought they were mannequins. Then I noticed a slight rise and fall of shoulders. A breath, tiny and deliberate, barely disturbing the air. The ridge seemed alive. Every cabin flickered in unison. Lights danced behind curtains, shadows stretching along the walls. I could feel them watching me, though their faces never moved. I crouched, trying to see more clearly. The fog shifted, curling through broken windows. The yellow glow illuminated splintered wood, old furniture, empty plates, cups. And the figures remained silent and perfect, staring outward. I couldn't move. A soft wind swept across the ridge, carrying the smell of smoke, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, almost like decay. The hum inside my skull grew louder, insistent, as if the ridge itself wanted me to understand. A light flickered, closer now, across the path. I realized each cabin's glow was synchronized, as though breathing together. I swallowed, and my throat felt heavy. I leaned against a tree. The fog touched my skin, icy and soft. Branches tapped lightly, rhythmically. I felt small, alone, exposed. And then I understood. The figures weren't looking at the windows. They weren't waiting for anyone outside. They were waiting for me. I turned away slowly. Each step was muffled by fog and fallen pine needles. The light seemed to follow, flickering deeper into the ridge, stretching endlessly. I didn't look back. I felt the warmth of a yellow light pressing behind me, constant, patient, waiting, and the hum stayed, soft in my chest, like a pulse that was my own. The ridge swallowed the sound of my footsteps. The fog thickened around me, hiding everything I left behind. But in the corner of my vision, I felt them still there, seated, waiting. Alone, I moved into the dark. The smell of wood smoke lingered. The warmth of the light stayed in my mind, imprinting itself, unrelenting. And I knew the ridge would remember me. Even if I never returned, even if I never looked back, the cabins would wait. The figures would wait. The lights would wait. I kept walking, breathing quietly, hoping the fog would hide me, hoping the ridge would forget. But the yellow glow followed, just at the edge of memory, just beyond the reach of the trees. The night was cold. Fog clung to the peaks like damp wool. The air smelled of wet stone and pine resin. I was alone. The trail had vanished beneath the mist. Every step sank softly into moss and loose gravel. A hum began, low, beneath the soil. It vibrated under my feet, through my chest, a resonance I could feel in my bones. I stopped. The fog trembled around me, curling in small, restless fingers. Branches shivered without wind. The mountain waited. I could sense it, vast and patient, pulsing beneath the earth. It had been watching. My name came next, not shouted, not whispered, but carried in the low rumble of shifting stone, rolling like water beneath rock. It stretched along the ridge, vibrating in the fog, in the cold air in my chest. I shivered. The hum deepened, vibrating in time with my heartbeat. I reached out to steady myself on a boulder. Its surface felt alive, cold, rough, and slightly warm beneath my fingers, as though breathing. The trees leaned in. Fog hugged their trunks. I could smell damp earth, pine sap, faint smoke from nowhere. Every scent was thick, palpable, heavy. I whispered back, a single word. My name. The mountain answered, not in echo but in recognition. The vibration grew. Pebbles shifted. A distant rockfall murmured through the valley. Every sound was amplified, folded in layers, a chorus of waiting. I realized then, the mountain hadn't just observed me. It had been waiting for this. I tried to move, but my legs felt rooted. The fog pressed against my skin, soft and damp. Breath clouded the air in front of me, each exhale thick, visible, trembling in response to the hum. A pale light reflected off the mist. Shapes shifted, faint silhouettes in the fog. I wasn't afraid, not yet, just aware of the inevitability, the weight of being seen. The earth pulsed beneath my hands as I crouched. The sound was everywhere. It was in the rocks, the trees, the cold air brushing my face. A resonance that whispered of patience, of time, of inevitability. I closed my eyes. The hum wrapped around me, a living vibration, holding me. I could feel the mountain's attention on every inch of me. It had been awake while I slept, waiting while I walked, watching while I wandered. When I opened my eyes, the fog had thickened. Shapes dissolved into gray. The valley stretched, infinite and silent, alive in a quiet hum that only I could feel. I spoke again. My name, drawn out in the fog. The mountain answered. A low, rolling acknowledgement, soft and eternal. I understood then. This was not threat, not malice, just presence, patient, immovable, watching. A breath of wind stirred the fog. It smelled of rain yet to fall, of stone yet to shift, of pine wet with night. The hum receded slightly, leaving a soft resonance that lingered under my skin. I stood. The fog brushed my arms, my face, soft, cold, insistent. The mountain pulsed beneath me, patient. And I felt the quiet acceptance that comes with knowing I had never truly been alone. I stepped forward slowly, the ground soft beneath my boots. Every step measured, deliberate. The hum stayed just beneath perception, a heartbeat shared with the earth. I turned back once. The ridge faded into gray. Shapes disappeared. But the vibration remained, a memory in my bones. And I realized I would carry it with me. The mountain had spoken my name, and I had answered, quietly, finally, alone, accepted into its rhythm, its patience, its endless waiting.